Hello, everyone. Thank you for your participation. We're now going to talk a little bit how entrepreneurship in Brazil and higher awareness on wanting to produce positive impacts for society and the planet. So we're going to see how these entrepreneurs have solved long-standing problems in the Brazilian society. And to lead this conversation, I call Vanessa Dashi, the co-founder and chief editor of R7 magazine. Hello, Vanessa. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everyone. May I start? Yes, you may. Well, this event is extremely focused on investors. I think it's very important to have this panel to bring the view of the companies which are invested in. And we're going to see the companies which are backed, setting up the businesses which can make a difference. And in the case, we have three cases which cause social impact in three different areas, and this makes the project more interesting: education, health, and financial inclusion. The three cases saw their businesses skyrocket in the pandemic due to different reasons. I think this conversation will be very exciting. Gabriel Brangero is the founder and CEO of Green Courses Online, founded in 2012 as a platform which offers online courses, technical training for bar exam associations, training, lots of different courses to help students. It's kind of like a Netflix where the user pays 60 reals per month and they have access to lots of content. If I'm not mistaken, we have 24,000 courses available in this platform that they have access to, and the company just went through its first series rounding and became the first invested in by the Impact Fund of BTG Pactual. The second company is SoCoin, founded by Marcelo Francis, who's with us. He's the CEO. SoCoin is a fintech, but it's a different fintech. It's a fintech that works in the background. You know, they set up a cloud computing and they set up partnerships with the cities and water and light utilities, and they allow you to pay your bill. And it services two audiences: other fintechs which use that platform in their back end, as well as thousands of entrepreneurs throughout Brazil which created the service to offer to those people who don't have access to banking services. SoCon has been backed by a few funds, and they went through two funding series through Vox Capital, which is the main root impact investment fund. A lot of people know this fund here, and they'll have a lot to share with us. And our third speaker is Paula Solomon, who's the new business developer at Entera. And Paula's with us to talk about the case of Madura Med, which is one of the backed companies of Entera. Entera was founded in 2005, focused on venture capital funds. It's got two funds, Createch and Primatech, and it's in Createch that they invested in MagnaMed way back then. Who is MagnaMed? I think that with the pandemic, it became better known, and it made more sense because they create lung respirators, which until the other day, nobody really knew what a respirator was, but through the pandemic, we all have learned what a respirator is. The crisis has become a great opportunity for MagnaMed. They doubled their production capacity from 200 to 400 pieces of equipment per month during the pandemic, and they got various insights, and now the company is looking into international expansion, especially into the American market. After that introduction, I'm going to go into questions and answers. I wanted to start talking about motivation, everybody's motivation. And I would start here with SoCoin. I would like to ask Marcelo França. Marcelo, SoCoin wasn't born looking at those fintech and small business as the public, as their target. I mean, how did this target audience find the company, or how did the company find these people? And did you have an idea of the social impact you were going to cause when you started the business? Well, Cellcoin originally it came from we have previous experience in a bank called Lemon Bank where we created a corresponding bank to bring financial services and to solve the issue of geographic availability. And basically we had a prepaid digital bank account. We looked at the penetration of smartphones and we would look at those mile-long lines in the banks, and we wanted to solve these things. And the idea was that everybody with a smartphone would be able to take care of their own transactions. We launched it in March of 2016. It didn't gain a lot of traction. You know, we needed more recurrency, and then two things happened. We noticed a small group of users using it very intensely, and we went to the countryside of Ceará to see what was happening, and we saw micro entrepreneurs, small retailers using the platform to service the local communities. We interviewed these entrepreneurs, we interviewed the people, and they were all very satisfied, happy of having to avoid a banking agency or a banking correspondent to do their transactions there. And we also started to receive demands from the first fintechs, the first prepaid cards. Basically, the user would have a card, but they would use it very little, but they had to use their bank to, they would have to pay their bills and everything in their own bank. Therefore, we decided to open up our platform even before that wave of banking as a service, open financing. We basically opened it up to everyone, and today we service over 150 banks, fintechs, brokers, carriers who use our platform and APIs to take services to their digital customers. We now have 35,000 micro entrepreneurs using the platform to bring those services to their target audience. We are present in 2/3 of all Brazilian cities. That social impact, is that something that you had an intention of doing? We always loved that issue. Brazil in the decade of 80s, we created the state-run banks, and the state-run banks had that objective of servicing the socially excluded population in the states and the countryside, and many banks were closed, privatized. There was a consolidation, and then we started to see payments in the lottery houses in 1991 because the big banks found that the socially excluded audience that would flock to the agencies, in the words of the IPEA data source, they were just a pain in the neck because they weren't a client, they didn't generate revenue. So what are they doing here in my branch? And they would generate lots. And so they agreed to use the lottery houses to receive these payments, and they threw this population that didn't have access to banking services to pay their bills to the lottery houses. And when we saw the opportunity of being able to solve this issue, even with another type of solution, which wasn't our first option or our first conception, we continue doing this, and we continue to work. And talking to other companies who studied this issue of the lottery, you have many people paying bills, you have elderly people, you have people from all classes. So in this platform model, we were able to solve this kind of issue in partnership with many other fintechs, digital banks, and micro entrepreneurs who end up having their business, let's say they end up having their business boosted, getting more people and getting additional revenue, offering those services. Besides solving the problem, we can also help all of these micro entrepreneurs who have been on board since the beginning. Wonderful. Gabriel, you at Grand Courses, what was the problem you identified? I know that the Brazilian company has a deep connection with the public courses or the government job entry exam courses. What were your challenges in developing these courses? We saw that the preparation for these entry exams for government positions was not democratic. People used to need to change to a big city center like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, spending high amounts. Of course, this limits who can take the entry exam. To get there, adequate preparation in a face-to-face course, going there every day. Then you have meal costs, you have transportation costs. Added to that, you're outside of your home or your home city many times, and that would restrict their people's opportunities. On the other hand, these entry exams happen all throughout Brazil. There are people all throughout Brazil wanting the content, the platform, the preparation, the technical training, so they can change their lives, but there wasn't, at least at a level we thought would be adequate, there wasn't a structure that would be able to be accessed 24/7 anywhere. And we found this as an opportunity. We wanted to create a tech platform with this DNA, this government position entry exam. It's not just a distance learning platform that spits out content to the user, but the entire ecosystem is inside this platform, which helps to speed up learning. It goes well beyond the content. I mean, the content is only part of the platform. And the proposal was to offer this at a much more accessible price. Of course, getting a certain volume, you would be able to democratize learning in a way that seemed impossible before. If the guy can think about 10, 15 years ago, the person would have to pay 500 reals per month to study in an entry exam course, and they pay this now per year to have access to our unlimited platform, choosing which exams they would like to study for. So there's this subscription concept that we ended up inaugurating later. It wasn't right in 2012. The development into subscription service was done after we founded the company. The cost of doing this course is a lot lower than doing a face-to-face or a presential course. So now we've got people, gaining government jobs who recently wouldn't have that chance. And we've done a survey. I forgot to say good afternoon. Actually, I'm sorry for my bad manners. Good afternoon, everyone. I got excited here. I was so excited that I even forgot to say hello. And so I did some research, and 45% of our students said they wouldn't even have a way of studying if our product wasn't available. 70% of our students live in cities with less than 100,000 inhabitants. Only 37% of our students live in cities with over 100,000 people. So you can see that there's been a huge inclusion of people who wouldn't be able to prepare prior financially, and that is not what we want. We want everyone to be able to be included. We want everybody fighting for the government jobs, and not only those who can pay for their move and to pay for an expensive course, and that's what we had as a focus. Well, and this was during a time where it wasn't as obvious, it wasn't as obvious. Distance learning wasn't as obvious then. Yeah, I would say that we're even late, in 2013. But also Brazil allowed to be a little late on these things, The markets abroad are much more developed. But we went in with our soul and we gained lots of market, and that's the idea. We want to offer tools which will accelerate learning at a low cost, and we want to include socially excluded people and allow them to at least be considered for these government positions. Like I said in the beginning, I think that with the pandemic, it's been clear for everyone of what are respirators and why they are important. When you invested in MagnaMed back then, you obviously didn't have this in mind. So what was your investment thesis? What did you see in the company? Hello, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for your question. Thank you, Gabriel. and Marcel for the inspiration. The investors who look for companies like their company, the company that went after MagnaMed, I think MagnaMed has an interesting history because, normally the entrepreneurs are not really clear on the impact that they're going to generate. And many times it's up to the investor or the manager to help the entrepreneurs down this path of development towards higher impact. And we spoke about the case of MagnaMed. When it started, there were just researchers in it who were very well qualified, who had left a research facility in Brazil. The three founding partners had great qualifications. They were University of São Paulo researchers and scientists developing hospital equipment and working with quality benchmarks for the existing respirators at the time. And despite having those skills and understanding what they could do, but they at that time didn't even know what that business could become and what that business became and the impact it was able to generate in this clear present status. But what used to exist, the context in the past was that it would just be a treatment unit or a unit for medical care in the intensive centers with very large equipment, very complex, very expensive equipment, which many times would not be able to be transported or dislocated or even used in emergency situations, compromising the relationship between the patient and doctor, which was suffering and this enabled a better relationship between doctor and student. And throughout the development of MagnaMed activities, it's interesting to note the development of the entrepreneurs perceiving this as an impact business, and we invested in the company in 2008, and in 2015 they raised money with an impact fund due to this maturity of the impact thesis of the business. But we also matured what the business would be. We thought about what the business would be, going past just benchmarking equipment and measurement equipment, calibration equipment for respirators, to the production of a complete line of lung respirators. And when it came to the market, it was totally innovator in global terms, because due to this ability of miniaturizing the components, I'm just speaking as a layperson, when you miniaturize the components which are inside a complex piece of equipment, then you can allow portability, then you can allow that equipment be lighter for transportation, and you bring technology which changes the use routine of that equipment. And that was new, not only in Brazil, but for the world. And MagnaMed is a company that has exported to over 60 countries. And with that equipment and equipment which is more and more technological, we even have respirators where you actually don't need the oxygen cylinder to be able to feed the respirator, so the respirator actually extracts the oxygen from the air. So we've been making constant progress, and we've been seeing constant innovation in this family of respirators, which generated in a time where we really needed to have national technology with quick production. Like you said in the beginning, and it wasn't just twice, it was 10 times that they increased their production capacity. And MagnaMed, they were able to produce 200 pieces of equipment a month, and during the pandemic they produced 2,000 pieces of equipment per month, thanks to a network which was built together with other big companies, which allowed for this action, this initiative to happen quickly with a more accessible quest and a better speed, maintaining the standard of quality that this type of equipment requires. It's very hard for the investor to say, hey, but there's no way to foresee a pandemic. You can't just foresee a pandemic. And for the next entrepreneurs, sometimes when we generate a business, you can't really foresee what that business will be in the future. But if you hadn't done that investment in the past, and if you hadn't developed that type of business in the past, then you harm your capacity of being competitive as a country in the future or in the meantime, like the pandemic, and also during growth times and development times, potential times of economic growth to generate income, generate employment, as was shared by Gabriel and Marcel. When you innovate, when you place technology in markets which have the potential of improving, be they social or environmental ventures, you prepare the country to have companies that are development drivers. Even when, either when a pandemic happens or when we need to take a leap as a country and generate earnings and generate environmental impact like companies in our portfolio do. So you don't have to necessarily understand or to foresee the future, but you need to prepare and have the best technologies and efforts at hand to develop businesses which generate positive benefits. Cool, Paula. We had a scenario in Brazil of, lack of equipment. We had a lack of equipment, respirators, even prior to the pandemic. But let's talk about this year, which was a challenge for MagnaMed. We're gonna talk now about challenges, and I think it would be interesting to hear from you, Marcelo. Last year, your round raised 23 million. This one led by Vox. And you were going to use the proceeds. At least I remember that at that time, this was the conversation. You would create new equipment. You wanted to also do automatic billing, which you have done. Do you want to become a complete infrastructure for fintechs? What is the path down the road? We want to expand the array of products and services. Right after the allocation, whatever we said we would use the proceeds for, we used them for that. At first, we unlocked the access to services which before were restricted to the biggest banks. Prior, you could only have certain transactions going through a lottery or having an account in a big bank. So we were able to unlock access. Now you see this type of transaction in all types of fintechs, and you can also pay in your local store as well. And what we want now, we want to raise the bar, and we want to drive more recurrency. We want to work with the fintechs, the digital banks, because many people still use a big bank as their primary account. Everybody has an account on the fintechs and everything, but they still anchor their main capital in the large banks. So that's why we created automatic debiting APIs, open banking APIs, in order to bring recurrency and to allow that these new companies be able to create experiences which don't exist yet. With open banking, you can provide better credit, you can provide a more personalized offer once you know your client better. Sometimes inside your digital portfolio, you can access your balance in other places as well. So we are very optimistic about this new set of APIs. We've gotten really positive feedback on those, and we want to be the main or the key prominent platform. Perhaps we are today the biggest open finance platform. We didn't have these fancy names back then when we started, but now we are positioning ourselves as the great open finance platform in Brazil. Lots of impact there then, right? Do you think you're going to become a unicorn? Well, that would be a consequence, I mean, we've got over 8 million people who we can in some way impact. Therefore, I end up thinking that this ends up being a consequence of the work, of the progress of the business. Gabriel, in your latest round with BTG, which is the first investment of the first impact investment at BTG. You haven't told us any amounts, but if you want to tell us, breaking news, that would be great. But I wanted to know, what are you going to do with that ton of money that you got? The pandemic accelerated digital education, and I imagine that you are very ambitious to continue driving up your reach. We'd like to expand to other topics. We're already very strong in government entry exam training. We work in the big cities, in the countryside. We offer courses for federal jobs, state jobs, city jobs, auditors, cops, essential jobs for the country, which are going to continue. There's no way to see a country in the future without these positions, and we are strong in this area. But, the market's still extremely fragmented, so we're very far from any eventual consolidation that'll happen over time. But imagine that 20 years ago, the market structure used to be just physical brick-and-mortar schools in specific cities and states, or perhaps in just a group of states in the south. It was very regional. Distance learning started to change that, but a few companies are still not huge companies. We are a few of the companies which had backing of this size, so we'll have more muscle to penetrate where we are strong. We'll have to go into states where we're not that strong, cities where we're not as known, areas where we're not the main player. And we also have plans to use this entire technological structure for other areas as well. The logic is the same. You basically just adapt your course, but it's an educational platform like any other, whether it's a government position or a medical residency in some hospital. You can use the course in the same manner. So there's lots of opportunities because everybody needs knowledge, and we want to solve the need of the student to access quality training, to increase their income, to get a job, to be able to get some kind of training which will open up doors for them. There is a project. We have a huge dream here, and we want to make it grow very soon, and we want to have our own college. Our own graduate and postgraduate program. We do have that, but with a partnership with another college. We want to internalize that because we think that this model is very beneficial. I mean, you won't have to go 4 years to college. I mean, you're limited to the teachers that are there in that region. And we want to offer something different, where people will be able to choose their education, an education that's more adequate, that fits into this ever-changing world. You could have teachers even in other countries, and you'll be able to get this content from them. And this will definitely open up doors for you, and people need this. So we want to do this. We want to work with graduate programs and postgraduate programs. Other professional exams, which we're not focusing on right now, depending, perhaps we can have like vocational training. And we are going to become a big tech solution for people who want to acquire knowledge. Very nice. I'm curious about your courses. I want to see how you make an interesting lesson, how do you engage students, and what tools the teachers use to engage students. I only see how do you get the students to not turn off their cameras during the lesson? Well, We're very used to this method. Many teachers were born giving lessons online. They never actually given a lesson in a brick and mortar school in their life. And there are still ways to maintain rapport and closeness even though you are remote. We try to find ways to make the physical lacking or the physical gap or the lack of physical presence not felt as much. This is just a little bit of what I wanted to ask you. To talk about challenges, I think that last year for MagnaMed was the year. 10 years in one, basically, is what you guys went through. You doubled your production capacity, but I was talking about its installed capacity, and I know that it can produce 400, but during its peak, it was manufacturing 2,000 respirators month to fulfill the 5,000 respirator order from the Department of Health. And, basically the Ministry of Health made an order of 5,000 respirators. The private equipment, private purchases were not allowed. It was a real war operation. How did the company overcome this past year? You got a lot of cooperation from other companies. And what insights did you gain from that experience? Vanessa? This was almost like a crisis situation, and if we didn't get together like we did, and if we hadn't made the partnerships we made, we probably would not have been able to deliver the order that you cited for the Ministry of Health, because the equipment was very complex and it demanded production lines, non-traditional production lines. So to have a facility which is adequate, certified, accredited to produce that type of equipment in scale is really complex. Therefore, we created a network of partnership. We did lots of close work, joint work between the largest companies in MagnaMed to be able to deliver that demand. Improving processes, reducing costs, solving any import bottlenecks. So we basically looked at all sides of the project and what could be done to speed up the delivery of these projects, maintaining high quality. This is a critical piece of equipment. You can't just build it anyway. It's different than you setting up a production line for hand sanitizer masks, which also had to be produced in large scale. That's different than a respirator where you're going to, have that connected to a person, and that person's life is going to depend on that piece of equipment. And we saw that production was a challenge, getting the actual equipment delivered. And besides MagnaMed, which already had the product developed to deliver, we also had other companies and other groups acting to produce new respirators for the country. That was very important in terms of technological capacity, being able to get other companies together in this endeavor to get the respirators done. We had already come from a history of medical equipment which was many times obsolete, no longer being used, or old models, and even those installed wouldn't have the skills or the actual modernity to help in this pandemic. So all of these initiatives made it possible thanks to all these initiatives from us and these big companies who joined MagnaMed and trying to help in these initiatives and these actions to structure networks together, working with Embraer and Positivo. Embraer is Air Force, and Positivo works with computers. All of them got together either to get credits for us to be able to buy the equipment, for us to buy the raw materials, to be able to produce the equipment, manufacture the equipment, be it helping to rethink the production process to make it more efficient, to make it more adaptable to a scalable solution. So there was cooperation, and when we see, I think that human beings have this capacity. When we see ourselves in a time of struggle, of despair, emergency, we do have a capacity to get together and to engage with each other. And we're able to really participate without having explicit return numbers, explicit returns. And that's very nice, our ability to being able to offer help. And if it wasn't for that network of companies, it wouldn't have been possible. I mean, many factors were involved. First, you have to build the solution, then you have to evolve the solution, you have to mature the solution. Afterwards, you have to create a partnership with many companies who are also looking at the production process, looking at efficiencies, speed, cost reduction, to make sure things are done as quickest and as efficiently as possible. We also need to mobilize resources that you need in order to be able to service that demand. You have a production planning where you have a certain type of inventory, where you have a certain working capital, and you need to really ramp up this production in a short time. You need to make capital available for that, and all of this contributes so that we be able to deliver. And thank God so that Brazil would have more calmness in at least this piece of the projects, more peace than other countries which didn't have this knowledge and this availability of companies inside its domestic territory. Everything was blocked. There was no export or import allowed. The countries wanted to produce only for themselves, as was the initiative of the Brazilian government, getting the national companies to meet the needs of the health department. Countries which didn't have the installed capacity were not able to provide the same response. I wanted to talk about access to capital. How was this marriage between you and BTG? Did you have other financing sources at that time, and why not another type of financing and this financing source? Why did you choose BTG Pactual? We started this process at the end of 2019, before the pandemic, and we decided to hire an advisory. And we wanted to get financing to accelerate the business. The company didn't need it to keep itself afloat, but we wanted to take bigger leaps, higher leaps, and the money was helpful. We had a proposal or management presentation where many funds took part in, and we got to the final stages with a few options, and BTG was one of these options, and they were a perfect match. Initially, we didn't know exactly what to do. We didn't know the market in these types of funds, and we weren't necessarily looking for someone who was an impact, an ESG fund. And BTG saw in us an opportunity, knowing that their fund would be inaugurated, their impact fund. And they saw in us the opportunity. And we always had the social awareness. We had social awareness as one of the key messages in the company. It's part of our business model. Once you offer a product at a lower cost to a higher number of people, you're going to democratize learning. And they saw the impact we were causing, and then they asked us what we could do. with a few indicators that they chose for us, and this excited us. Besides being someone that everybody knows, a company that everybody knows, the financial market knows, and and since they were an impact fund, that made a difference. And the other players weren't impact funds. The other players didn't offer that perspective. So basically, things just kind of fell into place, and we were able to close the deal. Marcelo, in your case, you got a second round of financing from Vox and other investors as well. But Vox itself is a pioneering firm in terms of impact investing. What's the importance for a company such as yours to have capital aligned to your purpose? What difference does that make? From us, since the beginning, from the first pitch, when we spoke to Vox, we already knew that we were going to close the deal. When they came, we felt a very close alignment to our impact purpose, to our impact objectives. Many contributions were made along those lines. We end up measuring, and there were many methodologies that we didn't know. Impact theory. We follow monthly performance KPIs, measuring the impacts which we're bringing to the table, and this basically goes hand in hand with financial performance. There is also the issue of culture. This also impacts company culture. Everyone who comes into the company, they know the history, they know the investors, and everybody ends up dealing the agents more carefully, thinking about how we can really help, how we can help more genuinely, I would say. There is a contribution, everybody is aligned, and we feel that the investor just doesn't look at cash flow despite it being important. It helps the team culture, it helps us to measure the KPIs, and for us, it's been an incredible experience, really. Anyways, I think the second round of financing, we had a non-binding agreement, which had been signed 1 month prior to the pandemic. When the pandemic came, then we said, oh my God, nobody wants to invest in us now. Nobody's going to want to invest in us. And we called them, and they were still standing, and we were able to achieve success together, and that's really nice. If we have time, I would like to speak a little bit about impact measurements, but for us to close this round of questions, Paula, as investors, how do you see alignment? The alignment of purpose, the alignment of purpose versus impact. I think the investor many times brings to the entrepreneur, I wouldn't say like professionalization, I don't know if that's the right word, but perhaps professional alignment and professional perspective of what can be done. Something that is different than the entrepreneurs can foresee, can see. Sometimes the entrepreneur at the beginning, they're very focused on the product, on the technology, on the value proposition they're going to offer. And in that solution they're placing in the market, and sometimes they don't understand the values generated besides what the product can provide is very hard. Many times the fund and we as managers try to bring this perspective to expand the entrepreneur perspective and to stimulate them to think way beyond that obvious plan, which many times many investors still see that result as a financial result. I mean, we have a perspective, and I think in Terra, like you said, Vox is a root impact company, I would say. We are a different type of a company. We seek out impact entrepreneurs or people who don't see themselves as impact, and we try to build this impact throughout the investment thesis. And the exit of our fund is done when the entrepreneur is ready to place themselves to the market as they mature, as a business, as a manager, as a team, as their in their DNA, like Marcelo said, and even in terms of measurements, KPIs, how to measure them, how to quantify them. Many times it's hard to quantify the result, the purely financial result, or to measure some external factor which is not directly connected to my business. The impact indicators. We have made a lot of progress in the past few years, but there's still lots to be done. Throughout the journey, I think that the entrepreneur and the steps that they end up taking, the role of the fund is to help them to consolidate, to professionalize themselves, to insert governance into their business, in their management system, and insert an ability to measure their impact, measure their data, to work the process better, to generate more intention in their intention. So the fund helps a lot along those lines, and that's how we try to contribute to all of our investments. I'm going to grab a question from the chat. In terms of gender and racial equality, what tools do you use in your companies? Considering the great inequality in the country, what do you use to stimulate race and gender inclusion? Who would like to begin? Our company is placed in Alphaville, Barueri City. We have formed partnerships with the colleges, educational institutions in the neighboring cities, Jandira, Osasco cities, and we're always trying to bring people who sometimes are very able, but who don't have the opportunity but who sometimes don't have enough criteria to meet the requirements of a big bank, but sometimes they may be good enough for our ranks. And we look at quarterly reports, looking at our diversity rankings, but we're always trying to bring people through these partnerships, and we end up seeing a natural inclusion happening, I would say. We've got people who came in as trainees, some are ship supervisors or coordinators, and, we've got constant work that you have to do in that regard. Do you have numbers? Do you have hard numbers? How that diversity plays out in the company ranks? I don't have the number here off the top of my head, but I do have those numbers, and we're very satisfied with our gender and racial inclusion numbers. Our audience is mostly women. 65% of our students are women. And a government job entry exam is a process where there is no discrimination by gender or race. If you pass the exam, the entry exam, and you go through all the stages, you are hired regardless of race, gender. And this has appealed to women because this seems to be a fair selection process. Our main tool to promote inclusion is the access that we give at an accessible amount, regardless of where the person is. 35% of our students are listed as heads of household. And you have also other women who also reconcile work, home, kids, and our platform helps you in time. We have a tool that's called the Big Study Management. It's a tool that the person sets up a study cycle. This is a methodology to organize their studies, and then they record their times. They have specific triggers of when they should study, how much they should study. All of that helps the team. It helps the student to perform well in very little time. Many of these women have 2 shifts, 3 shifts, but they want to change their lives through education, through an entry exam approval, or a job in government, or a job in general. Well, actually, my question was, how do you address this inside the ranks of the company, which is not clear, but I understood that way. But you're talking about the clients and the students. I think that's also valid, but I want to see how things are in your ranks. 50% of our employees are women. 49.31 is women, actually. Well, it was 50. Now it's 49. We know that the technology market is much more male-driven, and we want to bring more women to the IT team. We have an interesting piece of data that 45% of our chiefs, our heads, are women. We know that in women, that number is a lot lower than 45%. So internally, we are a company that is worried about gender inclusion, and which has that view. We plan on participating on a few women IT recruitment initiatives. We are planning to work on a few female leadership initiatives. And we also want women on our board, something that today is still a project, but in a general way, the numbers are positive. Do you incentivize gender and racial equality in your backed companies? Yes, we try to work this in all the companies. Despite being a small team in the financial market, it's very hard for you to see a team full of women, so we do our homework. My apologies. So we do this in-house. In terms of gender and racial equality, we've got great numbers in our ranks as well in our company. It's very hard. I'm the company who normally reviews the pitches first. In terms of volumes, very few women entrepreneurs present their business, do their pitch. And, we have very few female entrepreneurs heading the business. We see that. But throughout the investment process, like I said, we want people to mature. We want companies to mature, and we try to basically enable these companies and suggest and force these companies to include race and gender equality. It's almost as if it were like work. It's very, very strenuous work. We participate in groups and forums and different conversations. You have Impact Women's Network. You have Venture Capital Women's Group, which also promotes diversity. And so we try to militate and to reinforce this policy so that it can be more common to see women receiving backing, building their businesses. Even in the way that you question a woman or a man during their business pitch, that influences your willingness to make certain investments. Therefore, we are careful in the kind of questions that we make to male and female investors to not be biased in our investment decision because we understand that there is a bias based on how you ask. So it goes from things which are very tiny, which is the question I make during a pitch, to the woman versus the man, to the way where I stimulate participating in assemblies or committees where the ranks are made up by men, women, different genders and races. And that's how we try to enable diversity, but we do understand there's a huge gap and a biz to be worked. When you talk about impact to businesses, I think this topic has to be at the forefront of people's minds. We have to look at the product, of course, but we also have to look at gender and racial equality, and it has to be it has to be discussed at length. Okay, well, I think we've got 2 minutes to go. I'm just going to ask the last question. I'm going to ask Marcelo and Gabriel real quick. Marcelo, you talked about a few KPIs that you use to measure impact. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Which ones? And Gabriel, you mentioned that the BTG fund is bringing this idea to you as well. Are you going to start to measure it? Who starts? Okay, I've got a minute. Well, we take the KPIs when we look at the end consumer. We see how many end consumers we're impacting per month. The INSPA Data Institute gathered some data on how much people save in commuting, and we look at how much we are contributing to that micro-entrepreneur, how much we're adding to their monthly income, the volume of products that they sell. That's basically along those lines that we work. All right, that's fine. And you, Gabriel, are you going to measure? Do you measure? What's BTG going to bring to you? We have measured a few things. The idea is to have other types of surveys done and to collect that data. We focused on income increase after a certain amount of time. We know that people need to mature. It takes time for you to gain knowledge to pass your exam, but then we try to see the positive impact, how much things improved after an approval into an entry exam. There have been many types of data. There's been a lot of data that's been gathered. We look at the percentage of adversity in the cities we serve, the size of the cities where people access our course, the per capita income, if they studied in a public or a private school, if there is a way for them to study close to their home or in their home. That type of information is already being measured, and the idea is for us to fine-tune it even more. Guys, I would like to thank you so much, Marcelo, Paula, Gabriel, for your answers. I think this was very nice, and we were able to create a very interesting understanding from your words. I hope it's been useful for everyone. I'd like to thank ABVCAP for their invitation. I would like to thank the audience, and that's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa, for your great leadership, the great moderation, and all the speakers for bringing wonderful information. Thank you all who have been with us so far. We're going to take a quick little break, and then we'll go to our last panel, which will talk about institutional investors, and they will be talking about ESG and impact criteria. See you in a bit.